Well, good morning and happy Easter, everyone. Happy Sunday morning, happy Easter morning, and I hope you're all having a great morning so far. Let me adjust a couple of things here that are out of whack. There we are, other than my brain. And we're going to have a short show this morning, only because it's a holiday and I realize not everybody here has the same types of gatherings or the same types of celebrations that are going on. But at my house this year, we have guests that are going to be here today. And we thought they were going to be here the other day. And they ended up staying at some other relatives before they came here. So that is, so now it's all going to be today. So that's what today is like. How is everybody? Hey, Matthew, good to see you. Sandra, good to see you as well. And Allison, nice to see you. And all of those of you who are out there that aren't in the chat room, you can come in and say hi, or you can just stay where you are. That's fine too. I hope you have a cup of coffee and you're getting your day well. If you've got children, do you celebrate Easter by giving them Easter baskets? It's a nice tradition. I was never big on convincing my kids that the Easter Bunny was real, although we did it with Santa Claus to a certain extent for Christmas, mostly because I didn't want the real meaning of what Easter was about clouded by jelly beans and marshmallow bunnies and things like that. I wasn't a stick in the mud about it at all. I wasn't weird about it. I just didn't want those things eclipsed in my children's mind. And there was always, hey, Tom Keenan, good to see you. Randall Flagg, good to see you too. Let me ask you guys a question. The whole issue of Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny or all of that, I thought that was all fun for the kids. But at the same time, I thought, am I teaching my kids by telling them stories and trying to make them believe it's true? Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, by convincing them that those things were true, was I equating the stories of Jesus or the stories of the biblical characters at Christmas time and at Easter? Was I equating those to Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny? Was I making them as imaginary to them as was Santa and the Easter Bunny? So there's something to answer. The boogeyman, says Randall Flagg. Exactly. But the boogeyman's real. Santa, Easter Bunny, boogeyman. Which one of those three is real? So now I'm not legalistic about the whole thing because we always did Santa. It was just like a year ago that my 9-year-old finally started figuring out that there isn't a Santa, and we just spilled the beans. He said, yeah, there's no Santa. You've got it figured out, darling. But Steph said I had my youngest believing that the Easter Bunny lived on Easter Island. So that was one of the places she said she wanted to go for a vacation spot. Nice. Did she ever go? Steph, I'm curious. When did she find out that the Easter Bunny is not one of the great moai that you see on Easter Island? Did you tell her too? And I always thought this was a fascinating bit of history. Well, at least it fascinated me. The history of the mutiny on the Bounty. That was Captain Bligh, and how Fletcher Christian, his first mate, led a mutiny against him, and they set the captain and those who supported him adrift, and then you can come on over. They crashed is not the right word. They ran aground the mutiny on a little place called Pitcairn's Island, which is, on the map at least, it's not all that far from Easter Island, but I guess it's thousands of nautical miles. So what you looking for, child?
I need your concealer because I lost mine.
All right. Kids. Yeah, that's all right. So, always taking me pens. Where are me pens? Me kids take them. So, oh, she found out on her own, says Steph. Of course, the Catholic school she went to helped me with that. I'm sure. Yes. No, there are no wee little leprechauns in all of Ireland. So, my nun joke. Mm. Mm. Cheers and cheers, everyone. So that's not a conundrum or a dilemma or anything like that. It all depends on what you want to teach your kids about what you might believe spiritually. Let's say you're pagan. Here I'm talking about paganism on Christianity on Easter. Christianity is one of its biggest two holidays. But what if you're a pagan? Do you teach your kids that those gods exist? And if you do you teach them that Santa and the Easter Bunny exist? There's a good question to ask. Am I tacitly equating the things that are important to me in my spirituality or in my religion and relegating them to the same realm as the Easter Bunny and imaginary characters? At least in my kids' minds. Now, we have found that kids are pretty resilient. They don't grow up, and I think. But is this one of the reasons that perhaps when kids get older, that they throw out or they discard the need for a God or a Jesus or a deity because they throw those things out because maybe we laid the foundation in their deeper subconscious psyche that all those kinds of things are imaginary because we equated them all to imaginary things. So, hold on. I just have to answer somebody. Sorry about that. Had to answer an important question for somebody that messaged me. All right. So, let's see. Matthew Sainsbury says pagan. Yeah, it comes from paganus. In Latin, it just meant country dweller. That's right. But Orthodox Christians made it evil, bad thing. A very negative word. Exactly. Here, let me get rid of this. Oh, by the way, that's an illustration on this graphic that I did of the empty tomb with the he wanted it to look like the Shroud of Turin, so I put the shroud, the empty shroud, in the tomb, and the face cloth that was folded up. And as a matter of fact, I want to find something for you. Let's see, the Gospel of John. John 20, verse 7, is something that I want you to listen to here. Let's look at John chapter 20. Now, this is all in celebration of Christianity's greatest holiday. And that would be Easter, because it wasn't called Easter, of course, 2,000 years ago. It was Passover when this all took place. And but it was renamed Easter to coincide with pagan holidays when the church was trying to draw pagans into the church. So I want you to see this account. Let's read some of this account. It's lengthy to do this, but we can stop and we'll make some commentary notes on this as we go along the way. Now, keep in mind that this is a story. It covers 3 chapters in the book of John, and there was a point that I was making the other night when we were talking about the shroud, and we were talking about um, the story as that you find them in the gospel. John, people would say, well, he was writing an allegory, he was writing in myth, he was writing in symbolism and things like that. Yet we have a stark contrast. If you look at John's writings, he wrote the Gospel of John. He also wrote the book of Revelation, 2 totally different styles of writing. The Gospel of John is his account of his time with Jesus. I don't think it's pseudepigraphal, meaning that it's a text written in his name about. It's a text that goes back. You can find some of the original Gospels of John that were rewritten and spread around, distributed amongst the Christian community, dating back into the 1st century. And John lived to the end of the 1st century when he wrote the book of Revelation. But if you look at John, it's an account of, it's like a memoir. You look at the book of Revelation, that is a book of symbols and mythology and wild, crazy imagery. So you've got 2 contrasting books there. Hey, Scott Allen, good to see you. Susie Q, nice to see you this morning. And Allison, I don't know if I said hi to you, but I just see you tucked away in there in all the comments. So, let's take a look at John's memoir. I'm going to read a lengthy account to you, and I know there are some of you that don't believe all the aspects of this account, and you don't have to, at least for the sake of this show. That's between you and God, or your gods, or your lack of gods. You have to make your decision on your own. But in celebration of Easter, bear with me as we read this account. I know everybody likes to read the Christmas account, and lo, the angel of the Lord with the host of the heavenly host, came and stood before the shepherds, and glory to God on the highest, and peace on earth, goodwill toward men. We all reread those at Christmas time. We're very familiar. How familiar are you with the actual story of the resurrection, which is what Easter is? Good Friday, which was 2 days ago, by the Jewish reckoning, 3 days ago. Portions of 2 days plus 1. So let's start reading this. It says, when Jesus had finished praying, he left with his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. The Kidron Valley was outside the walls of Jerusalem. And on the other side of that was the garden. It just calls it a garden. And he and his disciples went into it. Now, today you can still go to Jerusalem. You go out the eastern wall, and there's the Kidron Valley down there. It's full of graves and stones and things like that. And you can just go up the other side. You can walk up there in 25 minutes, probably, from the walls of Jerusalem. And you walk up to the Garden of Olives, or the Olivet, the Garden of Olives. What is the actual Gethsemane? I'm sorry. It's Gethsemane's filled with the olive trees. And wow, my mind just blurred those 2 things, didn't it? It says, and that he and his disciples went into it. Now, Judas, who betrayed Jesus, knew the place because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came to the garden, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some of the officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees, and they were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, who is it you want? Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. I am he, Jesus said, and Judas the traitor was standing there with him. And when Jesus said, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. Now, I have to ask you a question. Is this this is the account of John? We have to ask ourselves when we see statements like that, are these things that actually happened? Do you believe they actually happened during that time? Do we believe the account of John? Or is that an embellishment to embellish the messianic nature of God, the divine nature? You can read this and believe it at face value, or you can read it and you can ask your questions. It's okay to ask questions. So there is no way to prove to myself, to you, to anybody out there that Jesus of Nazareth was Jesus Christ. Christ just being kind of a Latinized version of Messiah. Was, if you didn't know that, that's a pretty simple thing. Christ just means Messiah. So Jesus of Nazareth, or his proper name was probably, it was Yeshua. That's Jesus is a Latinized version of Joshua, or Yeshua. Some people are big sticklers on the name. Yeshua is Joshua, and just an older version of the name. And he would have been the son of Joseph, legally. He had a legal name. He was probably Yeshua bar Yashaf, Jesus, the son of Joseph. And or Ben, you could have Ben, Yeshua ben Yashaf, Yeshua bar Yashaf. So anyway, this is the account, and you have to determine for yourself, is this something I believe that happened? Because, and we forget some of these aspects of this story. When he told them, I'm Jesus, it says, when Jesus said, I am he, they drew back and they fell to the ground. Now, was that a miraculous event? Or did they all trip and stumble? I don't know. But again, he asked them while they're on the ground, who do you want? Jesus of Nazareth, they said. And Jesus answered and said, I told you, I am he. If you're looking for me, then let these men go. And this happened so that the words he spoke would be fulfilled. I have not lost one of you who gave me up. So then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. And the servant's name was Malchus. And Jesus commanded Peter, put up your sword. He said, put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father's given me? That's an interesting, we could do commentary. We could do weeks of commentary on these scenes. As far as Peter cutting off the ear of the high priest's servant, do you think he was aiming for his ear? No, I think he was aiming for his head. And the guy went, whoa, probably ducked, clipped his ear. And so I think that's a very interesting little account. By the way, Roger Rabbit, welcome. Happy Easter to you and to Carly and to Kinsey. And good morning, Morgan Snow. Welcome. Happy Easter to you as well. And so as we continue reading through this account, he says, I told you who I said I am. I told you who I am. And he says, I'll come with you, but let these other guys go, his disciples. He says, don't take them. It's me you want. And keep in mind, why was he being arrested? He was being arrested because the Sanhedrin saw him as a threat to temple income. Because he was swaying the people's minds. And so they were using his claim. They didn't care one way or the other if he claimed he was the Messiah. Okay, Messiah, see ya. They didn't really care. What they cared about was that his movement was growing and it was disrupting the flow of temple income. What did he do 3 days earlier? He overturned the money changers' tables in the temple and held them out with a whip. He crafted a whip out of leather straps. And someone said, oh, that's very violent. Well, it was not a happy-go-lucky scene. And what did he yell out at everybody at that time? He said, he's overturning their money tables, it's like a marketplace set up in the temple. He's overturning all their stuff. And happy Easter to you too, Jason. Good to see you. And and he holds them out with a whip, and he yells, "You have turned my father's house." He says, "My father's house is a house of prayer, and you have turned it into a den of thieves." And he holds them off for 3 days. There were actually 2 temple cleansings. That might have been the first one. He did it again that final week of his life. When he held them off for 3 days, do you think he did that because he had an army with him holding people back from? No. I think the people kind of knew he was right, and he tacitly had a few moments of respect from them or shame from them that caused him to do that. My temple is a house of prayer, but you have turned it into a den of thieves. There it is. And he called it my father's house in one account. So you've got this going on as a background. So they arrest him. He says, "Put your way," and then he yells at Peter. There's an exclamation point. "Put away your sword." He says, he says, "Shall I not drink this cup that the Father's given me?" And now we have to ask ourselves, are these accounts that are written because they happened that way, or because his followers embellished them? We don't know that for sure, and this is where it becomes an issue of faith. It's written about many times. It's been written about many times. But accepting that is the truth, this is something that's a matter of your heart. Then the detachment of the soldiers with its commander and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus. They bound him and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. And Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jewish leaders that it would be good if one man died for the people. One man should really die in this whole affair, and for the sake of the people. Caiaphas being the high priest at the time. And they have found his, I think it was his tomb they found, the tomb of Caiaphas in the city of Jerusalem. So now in some accounts, there's one other account, I think it's the account in Luke, where Peter cuts off the ear of the assistant to the servant to Caiaphas. It says he picks the ear up and heals the guy's ear right on the spot. "Okay, you can take me now." Here, wait. Don't bind my hands yet. Let me heal this guy's ear. Now, would you think that if you were part of a detachment of soldiers, and these are not Roman guards, by the way, you got to get that picture out of your head, that arrested him and took him off. This is temple guard. This is being done under the auspices of the Sanhedrin. Romans had nothing to do with this until the trial came up. And why did they have a trial in front of the Roman governor? Because under Roman rule and Roman law, the local leaders could not execute anyone. They could not do this without a writ of execution from the Roman procurator or governor, whatever you want to call him. So this is why the trial took place before a Pilate. But would you think, if you were part of this crowd, ask yourself that question. If you're there to arrest somebody and you see him pick up a piece of detached body part that had just been lopped off by somebody's sword and reattach it miraculously and heal the man's ear, would you still arrest him? Or would you go, "Dude, let's just tell Caiaphas we couldn't find him"? I don't know. Whatever your excuse is going to be. Yes, Matthew, stop turning my father's house into a market was basically what he was saying. And so this story goes on now. It's not in the account of John. John talks about him cutting off the ear, but he doesn't talk about him healing the ear, which is in one of the other Gospels. And why does John omit that if that happened? These are questions that you look at these and you go, why? I know they're emphasizing different things. I don't think they were thinking that esoterically. I think John was writing his memoir. Did it not happen? Did he omit that for a reason? Don't know. Well, this goes on. Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus. Because this disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard. But Peter had to wait outside the door. And the other disciple who was known to the high priest came back and spoke to the servant girl on duty and brought Peter in. "You aren't one of this man's disciples too, are you?" She asked Peter. He replied, "I'm not. Nope, I am not." And it was cold, and the servants and the officials stood around a fire they had made to keep warm. Peter also was standing with them, warming himself. Now, this, by the way, they chalked this up to the humanity of Peter. He didn't know what was going to happen to Jesus. Jesus is arrested. They kind of know what's coming. And so he denies that he's a follower. No. I'm just standing here. So, let's see. Where did I leave off? He replied, "I am not." And it was cold, and they were all standing by the fire. Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. "I have spoken openly to the world," Jesus replied. "I always taught in synagogues or at the temple, where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I said." And when Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby slapped him in the face. "Is this the way that you answer the high priest?" he demanded. "If I said something wrong," Jesus replied, "testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me?" Now, people get this impression because he was silent at points in his trial that he didn't say anything. He did. This is to the Jewish high priest and the Sanhedrin. He looked at the guy who hit him and he said, "If I said something wrong, tell me what I said wrong. But if I spoke truth, why did you slap me? Why did you strike me?" He holds the guy to account on the spot. Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Okay, this was in the courtyard first. They hadn't gone into the high priest yet. Meanwhile, Simon Peter, the big fisherman, you see him as kind of the head of the disciples. Let's see, one of the high priest's servants. Peter was standing there warming himself. So they asked him, "You aren't one of his disciples too, are you?" The people standing around the fire. And you could just see that. And you can just try to get the vernacular account in your head as you're looking at this. "Hey, aren't you one of the guys? Weren't you with him? You aren't one of his followers too, are you?" And Peter, again, he denied it a second time. He said, "I'm not." And one of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged Peter. "Didn't I see you with him in the garden earlier this evening?" And again, Peter denied it. And at that moment, a rooster crowed and began to crow. Now, the significance of that is earlier in the story. Jesus is sitting with his disciples. It's before they went to the garden to pray. And they were sitting there, and Jesus said, "Peter, do you love me?" And now, remember, this is written in the Koine Greek, and they were speaking Aramaic. In the Koine, there's 3 different words for love. There is phileo, which is brotherly love. There is agape, which is godly love. And what's the third? Anybody know that? I'm losing it in my brain. Kind of a fondness sort of love, an affection. Jesus said, "Peter, do you love me?" Agape, the godly type of love. Peter said, as it's written in the Greek. And Peter said, you know I love you. And the love, the word that Peter used was the word for common affection. "Yes, I'm fond of you." "Yeah, you know that." And so so Erastus, I'm not sure. That doesn't sound right. Matthew, I'm not sure if that's it. And that's the word. Eros is the other one. So there's agape, eros, and phileo. which is the brotherly love, the fondness. Eros, of course, is sexual, romantic love, and then agape is the godly love. So Peter is answering in the common brotherly love aspect. For what? I told her I'm doing 1 hour of radio and I will be up. She said what? She said that 40 minutes was long enough and wants you up right now. That I can't what? 40 minutes is long enough and that she wants okay, tell her I'll be up. I told her an hour. I'll be up in a few minutes. All right. So we've been cleaning our house for a week for relatives to come over, and I said I'm only doing an hour this morning of this show. And now Mama's mad. Raini is mad that I'm not up there after 40 minutes helping. We've been doing this all week long. Looks fine. There's things that need to be done, but I'll be up there in a few minutes. We'll finish this up. So sometimes when you have a family, you get to those points where holidays are no longer fun. It's all work and it's all everybody being mad and angry and yelling at each other until the guests arrive. And you're still cleaning up and wiping things down. And right now, I'll tell you what, our house looks fine. And so it's just little bits and pieces that still need being done. So where was I? All right, let's finish this story. When Jesus had predicted, he asked Peter 3 times, Peter, do you love me? Yeah, I'm fond of you. Then a few minutes back, Peter, do you really love me? Yes, I'm fond of you. And he says, then feed my sheep. Then a 3rd time, do you love me? Yes, I love you. And again, using the fondness word. And Jesus said, then feed my sheep. And he said, Peter, I'm going to tell you something. He says, before the rooster crows, later tonight, early morning, meaning, before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. And this was supposed to be that part of the story right there, being fulfilled, that that Peter 3 times denied him. And then the rooster crows. It says in other accounts, then Peter went out and wept bitterly. After that, he ran away. So then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. This is Pontius Pilate. And by now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanliness, they didn't enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, what charges are you bringing against this man? If he were not a criminal, they replied, we would not have handed him over to you. Pilate said, take him yourselves and judge him by your own law. And so Pilate's already like, what are you getting me involved in this for? This is a local dispute with your local laws. But we have no right to execute anyone, they objected. This took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. And so Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, are you the king of the Jews? Because that was the charge brought against him. Is that your own idea, Jesus asked, or did others talk to you about me? Am I a Jew? Pilate replied. Your own people and your chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you've done? And Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place. You're a king then, said Pilate. Jesus answered, you say that I'm a king? In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. Where Pilate utters that famous line, what is truth? That was his retort. And then he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, I find no basis for a charge against him for execution. But if it's your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover, do you want me to release the king of the Jews? And they shouted back, no, not him. Give us Barabbas. Now Barabbas had taken a part in an uprising and murdered someone. That guy. So this is the story, and it's kind of a shortened version here, because there were more things that took place, a lot of back and forth in this trial. But when Pilate, by the way, when he asked, what is truth, that is a bit of a written testimony to the kind of belief system he had, the philosophy he held to. That what is truth was one of the common phrases associated with what he believed. And so they asked for Jesus to be crucified. And when Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged, this is that, if you saw our show on Friday night, we were talking about the Shroud of Turin. If that was Jesus in that shroud, it showed the marks. But a flagrum, 3 little bits of metal that would tear the skin up, and the flogging, or the scourging as it was called, there was a law about it. It was 40 lashes minus 1, because 40 was supposed to be certain death. So 39 was what they legally attested to. So Pilate took Jesus, had him flogged, scourged, which is pretty brutal. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, Hail, King of the Jews, and they slapped him in the face. So once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, Look, I'm bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him. And when Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, Behold the man. Here's the man. I don't find any reason to have him executed. I've had him flogged. He's beaten. He's been mocked. He's got a crown of thorns pushed into his brow. What do you want me to do with him? I don't find a reason to execute him. And as soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, Crucify, crucify. But Pilate answered, You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him. And the Jewish leaders insisted, We have a law. According to that law, he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God. When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid. And he went back inside the palace. It says he was even more afraid. This account doesn't say he was afraid at all before that, but now he's even more afraid. Where do you come from? He asked Jesus. Now Jesus goes mute. He doesn't give him any answer. Do you refuse to speak to me? Pilate said. Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to have you crucified? And Jesus answered, You would have no power over me at all unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin. And from then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free. Outside, the Jewish leaders kept shouting, If you let this man go, you're no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar. What did the Sanhedrin care about Romans and their relationships with Caesar? They didn't. They were using it as an argument. And when Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the Stone Pavement, which they have located. This is inside the wall by the palace. It's not inside the palace. And it was the day of preparation of the Passover, and it was about noon. Here is your king, Pilate said to the Jews, but they shouted, Take him away, crucify him. Shall I crucify your king? Pilate asked. We have no king but Caesar, the chief priests answered. This is a bunch of bullshit. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. He gave them the writ of execution, and he washed his hands of it, which is not in this account. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus, carrying his own cross. He went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha, and there they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle. It was outside the city walls. And Pilate had a notice prepared, and he fastened it to the cross and put the board above his head, and it read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews, on his execution, upright to the cross. And here's his crime. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek, 3 different languages. And the chief priests and the Jews protested to Pilate, don't write he's the King of the Jews, but that this man claimed to be King of the Jews. And Pilate answered, what I have written, I have written. Now, you can do what you want with all that information. I've talked about Pilate before. I think he was between a rock and a hard place. He was under orders by Caesar to placate the Jews, to undo the anti-Semitism of the man who appointed him in Caesar's stead, Aelius Sejanus. And he told Pilate, you placate the Jews. But now you got the Jews all in an uproar, and they're going to tell Caesar that he let go this guy who's claiming to be a king over Caesar. Manipulate it. And so he let them do what they did. Who the hell was Jesus to Pilate? He didn't even know who he was. And here's this country preacher, and they want to crucify him because he's broken Jewish law. He says, I don't find any reason to give you a writ of execution. And the turning point was when they told him, we'll take it up. We'll tell Caesar. We're going to tattle the Caesar. Blah, blah, blah. There was a manipulative thing. So when the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, dividing them into 4 shares, 1 for each of them, with the undergarment remaining. This garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. Let's not tear it, they said to one another. Let's decide by lot who will get it. And this happened that the scripture might be fulfilled, saying, they divided my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment. So this is what the soldiers did. And near the cross, Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. And when Jesus saw his mother there, and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, that's John, who's writing the book, he said to her, woman, here is your son. And to the disciple, here is your mother. And from that time on, the disciple took her into his home. And then to speed it up, because I got about 12 minutes and I got to get out of here. Yes. Well, thank you. You don't have to do that when I'm on the radio. You just can come and set it down. Thank you. Okay. My children. So he turns over his mother to his friend John. Take care of my mom. That's what he's saying. So later, knowing that everything had now been finished and so that the scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, I'm thirsty. And a jar of wine vinegar was there. So they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of the hyssop plant, and lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he received the drink, Jesus said, it is finished. And with that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Now, this is a different account than the other Gospels. Fill in more details. The Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, the Aramaic, where he shouts out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And then, into your hands I commend my spirit, which all sounds very placid and neat for somebody who's died a gruesome death. But it's the way it's written down. So that's the account. Thanks, Scott. You saw my drawing of that. Yeah, if you go to my Facebook, it's a sketch. It's not even. I put the full color painting of it in the comments if you didn't see that, Scott. That was for somebody's book. I've got it over on my Facebook. But then they buried Jesus, Joseph of Arimathea. Now here comes the Easter part. Later, Joseph of Arimathea, who was one of the Sanhedrin, asked Pilate for the body of Jesus. He was a believer, by the way. Now, Joseph was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly, because he feared the Jewish leaders. And it's in one of the other books. Joseph of Arimathea is a part of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council. So with Pilate's permission, he came and took the body away. He was accompanied by Nicodemus, the man who earlier had visited Jesus at night. And there's an account of that. Nicodemus was also a Pharisee. And he bought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds. And taking Jesus' body, the two of them wrapped it with spices and in strips of linen. And this was in accordance with Jewish burial customs. And at the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden of a new tomb, which no one had ever been laid. And this was the tomb that Joseph of Arimathea owned, because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there and left him unwashed, as was the custom, and so on, saving it for after the Sabbath. Now, so early on the first day of the week, and by the way, with all the stuff of the shroud we talked Friday, all of those things took place. And the other accounts kind of bring in all the little factoids that were around that. So early on the first day of the week, this is now Sunday, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciples, the one Jesus loved, that's John, and said, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they put him." Now, why are they're all in hiding right now? Because I think, number one, I don't think they believed the resurrection was going to take place. And they were all afraid for their lives because their leader's just been killed. So Peter and the other disciples, they started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked at the strips of linen laying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. That's the sudarium. And the cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other laying on the side of, it was another account said it was folded neatly next to the shroud. And finally, the other disciple, John, who had reached the tomb first, also went inside. He saw and believed. They still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. And then the disciples went back to where they were staying. That's why Jesus said to him so many times to the disciples, "Are you guys, do you just not get it? Are you not hearing this? You're not hearing what I'm telling you." Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. This is Mary Magdalene. And as she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white, seated where Jesus' body had been. One at the head. I'm getting chill. I got chills just run all up the back, my back and my arms. I've read this account a million times and never had that happen. That's interesting. Seated where Jesus' body had been. One at the head, one at the foot. And they asked her, "Woman," and it's not meant to be disrespectful. It was a traditional greeting. "Woman, why are you crying?" "They've taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they've put him." At this, she turned around and she saw Jesus standing there, but she didn't realize that it was him. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it that you're looking for?" And thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you've put him and I'll get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." And she turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. And Jesus said, "Don't hold on to me. I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers. Tell them I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." And Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. And on the evening of that first day of the week, the same day, when the disciples were together, with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." How would you feel if somebody you know and loved died? Maybe when you saw this horrible death, and you're all gathered together grieving, and all of a sudden there he is. He's standing right in the middle of you all. I think it was a scary experience. "Peace be with you," he said. And after this, he showed them his hands and his side. The disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. And then again, this is where the doubting Thomas story is. And again, Jesus said, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I'm sending you." And with that, he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit. As if you forgive anyone's sins, their sins are forgiven. If you do not forgive them, they are not forgiven." Which brings in a whole thing about the act on the cross. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Was he forgiving those who crucified him? Are they forgiven? And so now Thomas, also is known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We've seen him." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger in where the nails were and put my hand into his side where the spear thrust him, I won't believe." And a week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them this time. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Thomas, put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." And Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen me and yet have believed." And it ends this chapter saying Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. And there, my friends, is the account of Easter, as it was written by John in John's Gospel. So I don't have much more time. I told my wife I would be an hour down here this morning because she needs help getting things prepared. And so even though I was up at very early doing laundry, putting sheets and blankets on guest beds and things like that, and cleaning up upstairs and all of that, she needs some more help this morning. So I'm going to get up there and help. It's her sister and her sister's husband and their 3 kids are coming to stay for a couple days. And so I think all will go well. I think I'll be down here doing a show tomorrow night. Intrepid Radio, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Thank you all for being here. We can comment more about this whole thing tomorrow. We'll get into some more detail. There is so much richness to the story that is worth talking about. Now, I don't know if I've convinced any of you what to believe. I still have my doubts and my questions, my historical questions, my veracity of the scripture verses. Was it embellished by his followers to make Jesus seem something that he may not have been? Whatever it is, we have those questions. We're going to have those doubts. But like Thomas said, unless I see this, this, and this, I'm not going to believe. Jesus said, "Look, here I am." He says, "You believe, that's great now." He says, "You've seen it. But blessed are those who haven't seen and yet believe." So do what you will with this story. We'll talk more about this stuff this week. Some of the history and some of the things. So, hello, Christine. Thank you. And a happy Easter to you as well. All right, everybody. If I missed saying hello to you this morning, it's Easter. It's a holiday. Everybody's off doing their own thing. I may not have seen you all as you came into the chat room, but we're cutting the show short this morning. We're just doing the 1 hour instead of the traditional 2, because I've got guests coming and I need to go help my wife with some of the remaining details. that we've been working on for 5 days. So just to make sure the house is right and she feels good about things. And of course, there's always, as you know, sibling rivalries that go on, the subtle stuff. I think she's got things because it's her little sister. She wants things to be perfect. So that's it, guys. I'm going to go help my wife. You have a wonderful Sunday, a wonderful Easter. And we'll see you again tomorrow night at 9 p.m. And if you want to, I think Wendy is doing a Wicked Women this afternoon. If I'm not mistaken, it would be at 4 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Central. So go check her out. Thanks for being here. We'll see you tomorrow night. And until then, live long and proper and prosper. Happy Easter.